Hello everyone, my name is Enrica Lovaglio Costello. I'm going to talk today about my project that is the Inclusive Forest Measuring Discrimination Across Culture Through Immersive and Interactive Narratives. And I'm going to be focusing on the making of the project, the making of the narratives of the virtual reality prototype and the biometrics. I would love to start the talk by explaining why it's important to me with a personal story. My Sicilian mother was sitting at a cafe pregnant with me in the north of Italy, explaining to her best friend that she was going to have her first son. A doctor in the nearby table corrected her, saying, "Daughter, your husband is a deep sea diver, and deep sea divers tend to have daughters." And my mother responded, saying, "If I had known, I would have never tried." Another strike against me was that I was born with my Sicilian blood and dark skin in the north of Italy, where they have a derogatory term for the southerner, terrone, that indicates filthy, lazy, prone to criminality. So I went through life carrying these two burdens, and at a certain point in my life, I decided that talking was good, but I really wanted to do something about it, build something that was going to challenge people to understand at a deeper level the unconscious biases that are so dominant in my country and have been in my life, have been damaging in my life, in fact. So this is an image of me in Italy. I started doing research on this topic and realized that there is one of the big research I looked into is the one of Professor Steven Pinker, is a Harvard psychology faculty that research mainly violence, but also discrimination, and discovered that in the last half a century has been going down. The number of countries that have laws on the book that discriminate against ethnic, religious, and racial minorities have been in steady decline. The women's rights movement has seen an 80% reduction in rape since the early 70s when it was put on the agenda as an issue, and the gay rights movement has seen an increase in the number of states in the world that have decriminalized homosexuality. The graphs that you see around his quote are from his talk and indeed confirm the decline in domestic violence, in rape, in murder, as well as non-lethal crimes against Black people, and an increase in decriminalization of homosexuality. So this is really good news, and it's good news for what pertains to what I call the blatant discrimination, or the conscious biases. What we know for sure, we know for centuries have been a problem. In fact, right now there is something called remedial discrimination that tries to remedy to the wrongs that we have done in the past. So we're very conscious of that. Now, there's another type of biases called the unconscious biases that actually tend to be very pervasive and problematic. Now, here there is actually a graph of the workplace discrimination that is kind of pertains also to unconscious biases, to pretty much both actually, but it shows that it is also that going tends to go down with some kind of going back up at times. But this graph is kind of the graph that shows that even in the unconscious biases, at least in the workplace, the discriminatory behaviors are going down. But indeed, incredible strides have been made against blatant discrimination. What has certainly gone down is what pertains to the discrimination that we consciously do. Despite that, we're still deeply divided. Today's racists are not only the extremists with white hoods, they wear business suits and uniforms. Based on a 2017 NBC News survey, Monkeypoll, 64% of Americans states that discrimination is a serious problem. 45% believe that racism is getting worse. This is, I believe, the discrimination that is actually truly driven by the unconscious biases. So there is a big chunk of the population that believes it's going up because we hear at the news how many minorities are stigmatized and criminalized even though they didn't commit any crime. There's a lot at stake in defeating this social plague. Hate crimes and police fatalities alone claim many innocent lives due to racial biases that most of us do not even know we have or refuse to acknowledge. This pervasive discrimination that arises from unconscious biases is harder to defeat. Bringing awareness is the first step. And as I said, the reason why I really care is because I believe that if we could defeat this type of discrimination, so many countries could correct, make corrective actions or take corrective actions, and populations like me might be able to grow up without a stigma, without big walls to separate them from other and make them feel less worthy. How much potential people like that would have if they did not have, if they weren't held back by these stigma. I want to show that this pertains only to unconscious biases and is in the media and in teaching. Both unconscious biases are in education and in the media. There are sectors very close to us. In the media, we can see that if there is an ad with only one of the two sexes, 25% of the ads feature men only versus 5% women only. 66% of the women turned off TV because of the way women were stereotyped. If there are commercials or TV shows that have both sexes, men tend to have twice the amount of, there are twice as many men than women. And when there is talk involved, they tend to have 3 times more chances to speak. 85% of women believe that the media depicts women wrongly, that they need to catch up. So in the media, definitely there are biases, unconscious biases. In teaching and in education as well, there is an important study that shows how faculty in 259 U.S. institutions received emails. Specifically, 6,548 emails were sent out with students asking for help. Some of those students had women and minority names, some had Caucasian names. And you can see that the Caucasian male names tend to have more responses across the board except for the fine arts. So the biggest problem in terms of investigating unconscious biases is that in a lab setting, the investigation of discrimination is notoriously difficult because the participants of the studies are directly observed during the experiment and do not always feel free to show their true self because it hurts their ego, self-esteem, and public image. Most of those people don't even know, most of us don't even know we have biases. The groundbreaking work being done in the area of virtual reality may provide some solution. VR has a unique ability to be a safe and parallel world and is safe because protected from the view of others. Art, as much as VR, can contribute to the creation of a parallel reality because it takes people into a world apart where the senses are heightened, where there are metaphors and secondary meanings that tend to reach the mind. Gino Yu in this quote kind of depicts this effect. Art applies physical materials to engage the senses and evoke emotional and visceral experiences. From a neurological perspective, visual, oral, tactile, and olfactory modalities provide alternate pathways in the brain to the limbic system. Activity in the limbic system has been shown to be correlated with emotions and memory. I'm going to give here a very quick view of VR and how it's going to develop in the next few years. We are about here at below 100 billions in revenues. We're going up to 700. Growth of user has been exponential as well. These are the sectors that use VR and their revenues that are extensive. And here is the sector that have the potential to use VR more. And they are the closer to my heart because they all are exploring the brain, human cognition, human emotion, pain, and how can we control pain. So those are the fields that are to me the most promising, even in defeating discrimination. The last slide just shows how high priority businesses, big industries is putting, industry have high priorities for VR in terms of top learning technology. And the fields that are most, explored or needs to be most explored, the most important to these industry players are increasing the amount of experiential learning and learning analytics, both of which are really strong key component of my project that involves virtual reality, art, and biometrics. Here I'm going to give a quick view of what has been done in the past. Scientific exploration of stigma in VR are very common amongst psychologists. The participants are generally a small group of undergrad students that leads to very much lack of diversity, but the biggest problem is that the assessment is done through subjective methods such as surveys that are going through perception and memory, so tends to be biased, versus using scientific methods and objective methods that are the biometrics. Another field that is exponentially growing because a lot of the industry is putting investment into trying to use them mainly at the moment for security online. Artist exploration to basically authenticate through emails and stuff like that. Now, artist exploration of stigma in VR focus on perceptions and emotions in order to instill compassion and empathy. So in a way, we can see that the scientists and the artists have completely different objective, even though now we have the field of biometrics that is very sophisticated and can be embedded inside virtual reality devices when we have a socially provocative art piece, and see how humans interact inside VR, and what are their heartbeat changes, brain waves changes, and etc., etc. I propose to combine these worlds, art and science, to basically deepen our understanding of human behavior and decision making. I created an art installation that uses a physical space, such as an art gallery or a public venue, in which there is a pod in the shape actually of a tree. You'll understand in a minute all the metaphors, and the participant can wander inside this pod, enter all their biographical data inside an iPad, so age, socioeconomic status, education, religion, then read a quick instruction that tells the participants that they will be in a situation in which there is injustice and they really need to intervene when that occurs. So encourage the participant to intervene. Then the participant will put the VR headset, and the biometrics will be hooked up to monitor the, as I said, heartbeat, brain waves in particular. And then they dive into VR, where they find themselves in this very fantastical game-like surreal world, in which these elements are floating toward them. At first they look like faraway stars, and then they come closer and closer, and they realize that they are neurons cells. So they're inside a giant brain. And this is kind of a metaphor to indicate that we're studying the unconscious mind, or the mind of humans, the human mind. Once the neurons get closer and closer, they find themselves standing on one of the neurons, like is a planet, and the little root-like tendrils at the end of the neurons are morphed into trees. And this is a metaphor to indicate that the forest is a beautiful metaphor that indicates that just like in the forest there are many different kinds of trees, in humanities there are many different species and colors and races, religions, and we all contribute, just like all trees contribute to the ecosystem of the forest. Once that they enter one of the trees, they can experience the first narrative. In that narrative, they find out they are in a convenience store in line. At the end of the line, behind a black woman with a young son, a transgender, a Muslim woman, and a homeless person that are being victimized by cashiers. First a Caucasian woman, and then a change of shift brings in a black man as a cashier. The reason why there are so many diverse, colors and religions and socioeconomic status is because I am trying to find out when does the participant truly react, in terms of not only biometrics, but even in terms of intervening. Now, you might wonder, why am I choosing to use more microaggression than kind of, strong, violent, events that would probably trigger more biometrics? And this quote from Robert Sapolsky explains it very well. Expose subjects to evidence of someone else in pain. If their heart rate increases a lot, it is they're unlikely to act pro-socially in the situation. The pro-social ones are those whose heart rate decreases. They can hear the sound of someone else in need instead of distress pounding in their own chests. Indeed, when I experienced events in which there was strong, violence and police squads with guns in VR, I wanted to flee. The participants in this case is given the chance or the opportunity to act, to decide, to consider what's going on and decide when to intervene. And that decision might lead to questioning their behavior and discovering that an unconscious bias is at the root of their decision. Now, is there a correlation between what is happening in terms of physiological signs, increase of heart rate, changes on the brain waves or activation of the brain, and the behavior of the person, the decision making? When do they decide? When is the moment in which there is a decision in terms of biometrics as well? Now, this research aims at answering this question. After multiple exhibits in different countries, the biographical data that is entered in the iPad, the biometrics that is collected throughout the experience, and the audio recordings that actually the participants will be able to leave at the very end of the experience, will be analyzed to search for patterns of discriminatory biases across different ages, races, genders, socioeconomic status. If found, these patterns could validate the need to develop educational trainings for specific groups. Ultimately, We must accept that we're going to be permanently biased. Once aware of our biases, we can hold an ethical commitment to bring intentionality in the way we think and interact with people that are different. Imagine if in Italy, when about the time I was born, my mother had gone through a training to let her know that women are not lesser than men. Maybe at that time, when she was in that cafe, she would have thought twice about what she said, or she might have not told me throughout all my life of that, wanting a son instead of a daughter. And how would that have changed my life? I would say dramatically. These are the methods and what I used for the prototype, the VR prototype, and I'm going to show you 30 seconds of the prototype to close the talk. I thank you very much for your interest, for listening.